What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got out of seeing Beetlejuice, and I'm ready to offer my spoiler-free review, or at least be spoiler-free initially, but I'll give you a big, fat, juicy verbal warning before divulging any details, and I'll also leave a warning or a time code down below for the spoiler section. But let's start with the basics. No one is more surprised than I to admit that I did not hate Beetlejuice. I was fully anticipating hating it because I've had a bit of a love-hate relationship with Tim Burton's career. Basically, I grew up with his movies when I loved his movies, and as a mean asshole adult, I've more or less hated all of his movies, and I feel like you can neatly divide his career into the good half and the bad half. But in broad strokes, here's the pitch for Beetlejuice ripped straight from IMDb. After a family tragedy, 3 generations of the Dietz family return home to Winter River, still haunted by Beetlejuice. Lydia's life is turned upside down when her teenage daughter Astrid accidentally opens the portal to the afterlife. And that more or less gets it done. However, the plot in this movie, it's very busy, almost excessively so. Like, it has a bit of a slow burn initially as it's reintroducing us to this world and the principal cast of characters. But once the plot gets underway, holy shit, it's like a goddamn locomotive, which definitely helps make it very enjoyable, very watchable. But it also detracts from your immersion in the environment. One of the things the first movie did so brilliantly was like really flesh out the world in terms of the rules of that fictional setting. The first movie is actually pretty complex in terms of its world building. However, it also is very accessible. And the reason I know the original movie was accessible is because I saw it on a date way back in the spring of 5th grade. Back in the day, like the big thing in the late 80s was for a lot of kids to get dropped off at the movies, and you basically have like these group date scenarios where you have like 6 couples all in a row. Maybe some of them have the audacity to hold hands, put their arm around each other, but very chaste, very innocent. But it was a way to kind of get away from the parents, and we happened to go see Beetlejuice, and we were just enthralled, and I must have watched it 10,000 times on TV afterwards, so there was never going to be any chance for this new movie to kind of occupy a similar place in my heart, because the movies that you see on repeat when you're 11 or 12 years old, they basically get ingrained in your DNA. You can basically watch them in your head anytime you choose to. But what's cool about this new one, or at least what is semi-cool about it, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you can tell that the cast and the crew are having a blast making this movie, trying to recapture and recreate some of the magic of the original. I'd say they get about 30 or 40% of the way there, and part of the I guess the secret sauce is actual tangible sets, actual tangible physical practical effects, actual tangible like blood and goo and slime and that sort of thing. Like, we've had an absolute I don't know, like a bubonic plague of crummy digital films as of late, where just it seems like every single character is walking around on a green screen or a blue screen interacting with stuff that's not there. This is a very tactile experience, and I imagine if you're young, you might even be shocked and amazed that people still know how to make movies this way, on an actual, like in a studio with craftspeople building something from scratch with their hands for the actors to interact with. And when I was at CinemaCon this past spring, there was a little Beetlejuice presentation where Michael Keaton came out, and he talked about how he and Tim Burton have been talking for years about doing a sequel to Beetlejuice, but they would only do it provided they could do it the way they made the first one, in terms of having like claymation and stop motion and all the ingredients that went into the original one. They're gonna do their best to recreate that atmosphere, that vibe. And one of the most flattering things he said about Jenna Ortega and her participation on the film is that when she got on the set and was watching all these older actors interacting, like legends like Catherine O'Hara, and basically they noticed how she kind of very quickly was able to kind of pick up on the cues of the other actor. Like, all right, I get the style, the tone, the atmosphere you're going for. Like, she's too young for the whole goth craze of the late 80s, early 90s, but very quickly she was able to get on the same wavelength. But as far as some of the negatives of this movie go, I'd say there are a few performances, which I'll get to in a second, that are a little more clumsy, like just a little less funny, a little less essential to the plot. You're like, what? That character could probably be removed from the movie entirely, but nothing that's going to like dramatically break the movie. I'd say this whole movie is like okay, or it's pretty good, or it's fine. Like, I'm not going to say I liked it, because when I say I like it, that's like, like you're planting your flag in the sand and saying like, I'm going to defend this movie. And I sure as shit didn't love it. But I enjoyed it. It's watchable, and there's one scene toward the end, and it embarrasses me even to acknowledge this, but there's a big musical number toward the end where not only was I smiling, I was laughing, and at one point I even got chills. We'd never in a million years did I think that would be possible, watching a soulless sequel, how many years after the fact? 36 years after the original? Like, in a lot of ways, this is the poster child for, soulless franchise extensions. But it does feel like a lot of the cast and crew made it with the best of intentions. I'll let everybody else be the judge of whether or not they were successful, but my crowd was into it. I say my crowd, and admittedly, it's opening night. It's all Beetlejuice fans. But my theater was about 2/3 of the way full. There was steady laughter throughout. There was applause at the end. And nobody was more excited than this little kid who was on my row. And initially, I was like, oh shit, little kid's in my row. But it was between his parents. But his parents were actually shushing him. He was asking a million questions. I don't even know if he even saw the original. But he was having a fucking blast. There was one scene that kind of scared him. And he kind of verbally said, that scared me. I didn't like it. He was kind of announcing to the audience. But at least he was engaged. And during the trailers, I was noticing he was asking his parents a lot of very observant questions about cast and directors. I can tell he's a budding movie freak, or his parents are movie freaks, and they're trying to kind of beat it into him. So who knows, in 20 years, that kid might be an adult filmmaker saying, when I was 6 years old, my parents took me to see Beetlejuice, and I saw claymation and stop motion and practical effects for the first time, and I was inspired to go off and do the same. But the big question for anybody who's been watching Tim Burton movies for a long time is, how does it compare to the rest of his filmography? My first Tim Burton movie was on HBO, Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Then after that, I saw Beetlejuice in the theater, saw Batman in the theater. Holy shit, I saw that in the theater. Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and Ed Wood. For me, that's the real hot streak. That handful of movies, that initial crop of films that immediately put them on the map, made them a household name. There have been a handful of directors in my life that have been household names where you can drop their name in a conversation and people immediately have they have a recognizable style. And I would include Steven Spielberg in that conversation. I would include Quentin Tarantino in that conversation. And before my time, people like Alfred Hitchcock or Charlie Chaplin. There's certain directors where even if people don't follow movies, they kind of know what those directors stand for. And in the late 80s, Tim Burton was definitely one of those directors. But I think Beetlejuice might be his best movie of the 21st century. Maybe Dark Shadows is a little bit more satisfying, but let's look at Tim Burton's 21st century career, going back to the early 2000s, starting with Planet of the Apes, which I hated, Big Fish, which I hated. I know some people love it, but I did not. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which I still have not seen. Corpse Bride, that was a pretty shallow attempt at recreating the magic of Nightmare Before Christmas, which Tim Burton did not even direct. He just produced it, but it's called Tim Burton's A Nightmare Before Christmas. Sweeney Todd, which I thought was fair. Alice in Wonderland. Kind of hated that too. Dark Shadows, I actually saw it on a plane twice. I was traveling internationally. I was like, fuck it, let's take it for a spin. And Dark Shadows, I think it all boiled down to the fact that I just really enjoyed that scene where the vampire and Ava Green's character had the big monster hookup session where they're playing the Barry White music and they're screwing on the ceiling and that sort of thing. It was hilarious. So I think just that one scene alone sold me on Dark Shadows. So I think that's still my favorite Tim Burton of the 21st century. Frankenweenie I did not see, but I saw the original short from the 1980s. Big Eyes. I don't even know what the hell Big Eyes is. I skipped Big Eyes. And then Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children I saw. Thought it was kind of a watered down, kind of lame version of the X-Men. Looking right now, Big Eyes, 2014. Amy Adams, Christoph Waltz. Blows my mind that Tim Burton had a movie come out 10 years ago and I have no idea what it even is. And Dumbo, I skipped the shit out of that. I mean, I saw the original cartoon as a kid a million times over. Have nothing but love and affection for it, but I did not have any interest in seeing Tim Burton's remake of Dumbo. And that was 5 years ago. Since then, all he's done is Wednesday, where he directed a couple episodes, which is how Tim Burton and Jenna Ortega first got together. And I obviously can't speak on behalf of the legions of Jenna Ortega fans out there, but I think on the whole, her fans will be very satisfied by this movie. And if you're not a Jenna Ortega fan, if you disregard the first 20 minutes of the movie, by the end of the movie, she'll also make you a fan. They have a small problem with this movie, like many Hollywood movies, where so many Hollywood writers write children or teenagers. She's not even a child. She's almost 30 at this point, but she's playing, a high school girl. But there's this tendency to write every single high schooler like this kind of petulant brat where they're always right, their parents are always wrong, and they're basically biting the hand that feeds them. And it's just this same archetype that we see recycled over and over and over again. Initially, she's kind of falling into that category, but By the end, you could tell she was getting into the spirit of things. And it helps if you're surrounded by just a murderer's row of great acting talent. I won't claim they're all doing or delivering equally good performances, but you got Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara, Justin Theroux, Willem Dafoe, and Monica Bellucci. And, well, actually, there's one performance I want to acknowledge, but I can't acknowledge until we get deeper into the spoiler section. But as far as spoiler-free praise and or criticisms go, Catherine O'Hara probably does the best job here. It seems like, I mean, she hasn't lost a step since the original movie. And the original movie was 36 fucking years ago. Like, she looks the same, she talks the same, she acts the same. It helps that she's stayed very busy in the decade since. I mean, goddamn, she's amassed a pretty impressive filmography over the years. But she seems to have, like, it's almost like she kept her wardrobe, like, in a trunk, like, just waiting for the day that Tim Burton might call her and tell her, we're getting the band back together, we're making another Beetlejuice. She just hurled herself into it. And she did make me laugh out loud a couple times. I always talk about how Mark Kermode has the famous 6 laugh test for a movie. And if you find yourself laughing involuntarily 6 times within a movie is more or less successful, I think Catherine O'Hara might have gotten me over the 6 laugh quota all on her own. And for anybody keeping score, if you say out loud something stupid like LOL, that does not count. You have to guffaw. You have to burst into laughter. It's an involuntary response, and it's very honest and it's very genuine. And Catherine O'Hara, she definitely brought the laughs. Michael Keaton, he's on fire. Like, he's actually incredible. The only flaw to the Beetlejuice persona in this movie is that they don't give him quite as many great lines. Like the lines in the first one when he's talking about like how he's seen The Exorcist however many times, and it keeps getting funnier every single time he sees it.
Well, I attended Juilliard. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Business School. I travel quite extensively. I lived through the Black Plague, and I had a pretty good time during that. I've seen The Exorcist about 167 times, and it keeps getting funnier every single time I see it.
I mean, some of those lines are legendary. And admittedly, I was 12 and I saw it. My friends and I used to quote Beetlejuice all the time. Like, sandworms, you hate them, right? I hate them myself. I mean, we just quoted him left and right. We loved him. He was a true pop culture hero. So the script lets him down, but in terms of the fire, the enthusiasm, the energy, Michael Keaton, yeah, he's still there, and I think he's close to 80 years old now. Hopefully, if they decide to do another one, he won't wait 36 years, because I think he'd be close to 120 years old if he takes a similar break between this one and Beetlejuice, but the name for the third film is just waiting for him. But as far as the rest of the cast goes, I'd say Winona Ryder gives about like a 50-50 performance, where there are times where she's able to kind of recapture some of the magic of her old character, but now she's a mother and she has very different concerns. Like, it was much easier when she was just the little goth photographer who kind of hates everything. Like, she was tailor-made to play that role, although she was incredible in Edward Scissorhands as well. Like, as a little kid, like, looking up to slightly older girls at that time, I mean, every kid in my class was totally obsessed with Winona Ryder for years. I mean, she was just so goddamn gorgeous. But tonally, this movie kind of struggles a bit with what to do with her character. What is her persona now, all these years later, when she's got all these responsibilities? And it's, like I said, it's 50-50. Justin Theroux is the only character where I felt like he kind of sucked. And I like him as an actor. I mean, shows like The Leftovers, he's fucking phenomenal. Or on Mulholland Drive, he was incredible. He's an actor that I do enjoy when he has the right role. I just feel like his part was kind of one-dimensional, kind of obvious. He's just one of those guys who's really into therapy and a lot of New Age philosophy, but he's just a total charlatan and very transparent and that sort of thing. But, but he doesn't break the movie. Willem Dafoe, though, steals each and every single scene in which he appears. And I'll get into more details as to why in my spoiler section, but goddamn, he's game. He's so game. I think he probably took a page from Michael Keaton's book and was like, all right, Michael Keaton's like going for it. I'm going to do the same. And the last big actor that I want to mention would be obviously Monica Bellucci, the lovely Monica Bellucci, who has been an absolute like sexual icon now for like 35 years, and she's still got it. And I feel like with her character, Tim Burton had the perfect opportunity to lean all the way in on that kind of Bride of Frankenstein aesthetic that he's never really fully been able to escape from its shadow his entire career. You can tell he's one of those guys where he watched James Whale's movies over and over and over again, completely fell in love with those movies. If you've never seen James Whale's movies, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Old Dark House, and The Invisible Man, 4 of the greatest horror movies ever made, and they all get my highest possible recommendation. But you can definitely see how, at least The Bride of Frankenstein, greatly informs the approach to Monica Bellucci's look. But her character Well, I guess maybe it's time to get into spoilers because I can't really give her adequate praise without divulging details. So if you don't want any spoilers, last warning now, bail out, 1, 2, 3. But Monica Bellucci is featured front and center in my two favorite sequences from the movie. One, we see her basically reassembling her body parts from these crates after some electricity runs through them. And what was bizarre, and I've never felt this sensation before, as her body parts are kind of writhing around on the floor, like half of a torso, part of a leg, part of a head, blah, blah, blah. Just seeing part of her torso, it was so curvaceous and comely. I was like, all right, she's already hot. She's only begun the reassembly process, but then she slowly but surely puts her body parts together, staples it all shut, and bumps into Danny DeVito of all people, who's, I think he's playing a janitor in the afterlife, and he's all dolled up with great contact lenses and crazy looking skin, etc. But she's the leader of a soul-sucking cult, or at least she was when she was alive, and her power is she basically can suck the soul out of people even if they're already dead, meaning that they go to dead for the dead, as that concept was introduced in the first movie. When that door opens and they see that apparition floating, there's dead and then there's true death. She can send people to true death, and she feeds off souls, etc. and so forth. But that scene was wild. I was like, all right, she actually is beautiful, but also a compelling villain and a legitimate threat. But in my favorite sequence from the movie, we get to see the wedding night of Monica Bellucci's character with Beetlejuice way back in the day, and it's portrayed in the style of a Mario Bava horror film, a movie like Black Sunday or Black Sabbath or Kill Baby Kill or any of his classics from the 1960s. And if you don't know who Mario Bava is, basically from the early 60s to the late 70s, he made a lot of brilliant science fiction films, gangster movies, horror movies, a lot of giallo and that sort of thing. But there was a certain aesthetic to Black Sunday, or I think in some places it's just called Mask of Satan. But you had Barbara Steele, who is very reminiscent of all, basically every single girl that's ever been in a Tim Burton movie is very reminiscent of Barbara Steele's character in Black Sunday. But we see the wedding night of Beetlejuice and Monica Bellucci in Italian with Michael Keaton narrating, and while they're drinking and rolling around the bed and that sort of thing, Beetlejuice realizes he's been poisoned and she's about to suck out his soul, but he chops her into a million pieces. So he does die and go into the afterlife, but then all of her body parts are left, unassembled until, a few hundred years later. But if you're a fan of that kind of low-budget, early 60s Italian horror aesthetic, you're going to be delighted by that sequence. And there are a few references to Mario Bava scattered throughout. Character played by Jenna Ortega, her father who's been missing and or dead for a long time. He is a Mario Bava freak, and Winona Ryder's character actually goes into labor during a Mario Bava festival, and they're watching the movie Kill Baby Kill, so once again, a lot of Tim Burton's influences being very prominently advertised throughout the flick. But as I mentioned before, the final 2/3 of the movie, it's very plot heavy, and it has a really, really rip roaring forward momentum. And the movie is also surprisingly short. It's an hour and 44 minutes, which is unheard of these days. Usually, when you get these big, giant, bloated blockbusters, they just feel compelled to make them 2 hours and 20 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes. I've never understood why. A great movie-going experience is far more important than, quote-unquote, giving people their money's worth with a long running time. If they have a great movie-going experience, they'll just watch it again. But the movie is short and it's fast, but maybe too fast. But there's one plot line with Jenna Ortega, which I really enjoyed. And I'd already become a fan of hers watching her in X 2 years back. But there's a situation where she meets a boy, and you think, oh, it's going to be some stupid, boring subplot where she falls in love with a guy who's a fan of her mother, blah, blah, blah. But as it turns out, he is a ghost. And not only is he a ghost, he's a ghost who murdered his parents, and his parents are ghosts downstairs. And that's where the movie actually starts to feel like a legitimate horror movie. Like Jenna Ortega's walking through the house, and you notice how the parents are always shown with their backs turned. You're like, oh, that's mysterious. But as it turns out, this kid, he's he's into the same authors like Dostoevsky and people like that. And they seem to have all these similar interests. But she basically tells him, look, if you marry me, that'll allow me to live again. But as it turns out, he's basically going to swap her soul for his so that he can live again, which means that Winona Ryder and Beetlejuice are going to have to team up in order to save Jenna Ortega before all hell breaks loose. But I have to say, I was actually impressed by the movie's willingness to get a little disturbing. But I think the most disturbing, or at least the most disturbing to the little kid beside me, the first time Winona Ryder and Justin Theroux were sitting there in Beetlejuice's office, he summons this baby out of her womb, like a little baby Beetlejuice, and it's crawling around, chewing on her leg and crawling on the ceiling. It's just totally demented and demonic and that sort of thing. But it actually was the best kind of demonic, perverse humor that Tim Burton is known for. And the use of that little Beetlejuice baby perfectly leads into the double fake out kind of dream sequence ending where you get like, basically it's ripped straight from Carrie. Brian De Palma used to do this where he would show you an ending and it'd be a fake out and people would like wake up and then there'd be yet another fake out and they'd wake up again. Like he does it in Dress to Kill, he does it in Carrie. But the music from Carrie by Pino Donaggio, which is just absolutely gorgeous, they started playing that at the end of the movie. I was like, all right, well, like no matter what happens, there's going to be at least one fake out, possibly two. And Tim Burton did not disappoint. Maybe I would say I was disappointed by his lack of originality in terms of tipping his hand by basically using that music and cluing in anybody who's over a certain age that like a double fake out is coming. But I did like the ending. Like the more I talk about this movie, the more I realize I kind of liked it. Like I'm not going to say I liked it yet, because for me, once you say you like something or you love something, well, then you're once again, like I said before, you're kind of like trapped in the position of defending it. But I might even go so far as to say that I would maybe recommend this to anybody who's seen the trailer and they're intrigued, like surrender to that impulse and go. But if you saw the trailer and like, ugh, I want nothing to do with Beetlejuice, well, then your instincts are also probably equally right. But I know that a lot of box office predictions for this movie have it tracking around like the high 80s or the low 90s. Based upon my crowd, admittedly, for opening night crowd, so they were kind of already like in the tank for the movie, I'm going to predict once again that this movie opens at over $100 million. But getting back to some of the tactile, practical special effects in this movie, they lead to some pretty interesting kind of gallows humor, which was definitely a reminder of the Tim Burton from the days of old. Before he became so successful, he could buy his own nation and live like a god emperor, making love to like the world's most gorgeous celebrities. I mean, if you just look at Tim Burton's dating history, it's insane. But when it comes to the practical effects, there's some jokes scattered throughout there, like in the waiting room, everybody always got those really long numbers. There's one lady sitting there who's like completely like ripped limb from limb, and she's covered in all of her cats, and clearly she died in a room surrounded by all of her cats. She's a crazy cat lady, and they've been feasting on her, or they were feasting on her until she slipped over into the afterlife. That was hilarious. And there's another guy in the waiting room where he's just got like 10 hot dog stuff in his mouth. Like clearly one of those guys from one of those eating contests, and he choked himself to death. Or the husband of Catherine O'Hara, who the name of the actor is escaping me. Hang on one sec. He was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He was in Deadwood. What the hell is that guy's name? Jeffrey Jones. His character of Charles, he died being eaten by a shark in a pretty gruesome sequence. We see a claymation sequence in this movie where he dies due to shark bite, but in the afterlife, it's just his body with a big giant hole from like here up. And so he has no head, but he's able to talk through like this little little blood squirt thing coming out. So yeah, I was actually surprised that the movie had so much fucking gore and blood and mayhem. But as I look at the cast of the original Beetlejuice, I should at least acknowledge that Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, they are missing this. I mean, they were the heart and soul of that original movie. And they really just helped kind of like ground you like on the side of the undead right from the word go. And what would it be like to be undead in your house trapped as all these freaks move in and start redesigning your beloved home? And I understand how they felt like the story needed to move on beyond them, but they could have at least acknowledged why they're not included in this. I'm not quite sure why Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin weren't approached to be in it, but somebody else out there, I'm sure, has got all those details. But in closing, let me ask a philosophical question. If this movie is a success, who deserves the lion's share of the credit? Like, is it Michael Keaton and all the aging fans like myself who are still ready to watch him put on the suit one last time and cover his face with dirt and start doing that, his signature growl and so on and so forth?
You know what's really beautiful about this? You two kids picked me. You didn't have to, but you picked me. It makes me want to kiss you guys. Come on. No, give me one. Come on.
Or is it going to be the legions of young Jenna Ortega fans? Or is it the people who have never lost hope in Tim Burton delivering one last good movie? I'm not going to say this movie ranks amongst his quote-unquote good movies. It's probably not even on the level of his second-tier movies. Like his second-tier movies, I would say are movies like... maybe a good example would be Sleepy Hollow would be a good example of his second-tier movies. And I don't think it's on the level of that. But if the army of Jenna Ortega fans out there fall in love with this movie, will they go back and start watching Tim Burton's older movies? And if so, will that lead to a new generation of filmmakers kind of discovering the joys of atmosphere and stop motion and great photography and lighting and wonderful music? Like whether you love or hate Tim Burton's early movies, No one can criticize them for a lack of atmosphere. Some people might even say they have too much atmosphere, but I feel like that first 10-year stretch, holy shit, it was all killer and no filler, as they say. And because the summer movie season is more or less dead at this point, there is an opportunity for Beetlejuice Beetlejuice to slip right in there and take over the box office for the next couple of weeks. So I'll be curious to see how well this movie performs. I was just relieved not to despise the movie. I've had so many negative experiences recently with movies like The Crow, or the director's cut of Rebel Moon, or the new show Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, and I'm going to have to review the latest episode in a couple hours. I'm not going to pull an all-nighter. I might stay up and watch it, but I'm going to review it tomorrow. But I've been on such a hot streak recently of watching so much crap. It was nice just to watch a movie that I did not despise, which I guess is not the world's most ringing endorsement, but it's better than a lot of the other movies that I've been seeing in the theater as of late. But I think at this point I'm officially repeating myself, so let's go ahead and wrap this sucker up. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.